With the essentials of cryptography covered, we have reached Chapter 3, where we will now get to know the essentials of TLS, the Transport Layer Security Protocol. In this chapter, we will first have a brief look at the overall objective of TLS as a cryptographic protocol, together with its history, then look at where within the TCP/IP model TLS as a protocol is located, have a look at the general protocol structure of TLS, have another attempt at making sense of the somewhat intimidating TLS cipher suites already presented in the war introduction of this course, and then have an in-depth look at the handshakes of both TLS version 1.2 as well as TLS version 1.3, as it's the handshakes of TLS that set the full stage for the secure exchange of TLS session data later on. Let me kickstart this Essentials of TLS chapter by restating the objective of TLS as defined by RFC 8446 that specifies TLS version 1.3. RFC 8446 defines in its introduction that the primary objective of TLS as a protocol is to construct a secure channel from an insecure channel between communicating peers that have never met before. A secure channel is understood to be a channel that provides both confidentiality as well as authenticity to the data exchanged. With this understanding, an insecure channel is then a channel that is neither confidential nor authentic, and a good example of such an insecure channel would be the channel from the laptop of Alice through the internet to a web server like the web server serving the site ibm.com. Without any additional protective mechanisms, the communication between the laptop of Alice and the IBM web server would often be based on HTTP wrapped into TCP/IP packets. None of these protocols provides cryptographic confidentiality or authenticity to the data exchanged, meaning that with plain HTTP over TCP/IP, the data exchanged between Alice and the IBM web server could simply be eavesdropped on or tampered with. With this chapter, we will now get to really understand how TLS then manages to achieve its objective as stated in RFC 8446. Even if usually not a historian on these topics myself, I feel it's interesting to briefly sketch out the by now almost 3 decades of history of TLS that started back in 1994 with the Secure Sockets Layer Protocol SSL version 1.0, and that has led to the most current TLS version 1.3, which was released by the Internet Engineering Task Force IETF back in the year 2018. SSL version 1.0, developed in 1994 by Netscape in collaboration with world-renowned cryptographer Tahir El-Gamal, was actually never publicly released due to security flaws discovered beforehand. The first publicly released version of SSL was then SSL version 2.0, released in 1995. However, quickly after its release, security flaws were also discovered for SSL 2.0, with one of the most severe security flaws of SSL 2.0 having been the lack of authenticity on the handshakes between the peers, allowing for man-in-the-middle attacks to make the session between the peers use weaker ciphers than actually intended. In 1996, 1 year after the release of version 2.0, Netscape released SSL version 3.0. SSL 3.0 was a complete redesign of the protocol and, for example, newly allowed for a more generic key exchange, which enabled ephemeral Diffie-Hellman key exchanges instead of the RSA-only key exchange of SSL 2.0. Then, in 1999, the Internet Engineering Task Force IETF released TLS version 1.0, which is specified in RFC 2246. As stated in Chapter 3 of this RFC 2246, TLS 1.0 is based on SSL 3.0, with the protocol differences not dramatic but significant enough that TLS 1.0 and SSL 3.0 do not interoperate. In 2006, TLS version 1.1 was released, and its specification can be found in RFC 4346. TLS version 1.1 was an incremental upgrade on TLS version 1.0 and incorporated mostly measures to protect against attacks on the CBC block cipher mode of operation used within the protocol. Shortly after, in 2008, TLS version 1.2 was released, and its specification can be found in RFC 5246. TLS version 1.2 was again an incremental upgrade and, for example, added support for authenticated encryption with associated data modes. Then, in 2018, the newest version of TLS, TLS version 1.3 was released, and its specification can be found in RFC 8446. TLS version 1.3 is a major redesign of the protocol and not directly backwards compatible with previous TLS versions. A first major difference to TLS 1.2 is a complete pruning of cipher suites, with only cipher suites remaining in TLS 1.3 that make use of authenticated encryption with associated data ciphers. A second major difference to TLS 1.2 and prior versions is that in TLS 1.3, all static RSA and static Diffie-Hellman key exchanges have been removed, and that in TLS 1.3, all public key-based key exchanges now provide forward secrecy and are either the ephemeral Diffie-Hellman key exchange (DHE) or the ephemeral elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange (ECDHE). Today, all of the SSL versions 2.0 and 3.0, as well as TLS versions 1.0 and 1.1, are deprecated due to the serious security vulnerabilities they contain. Remaining in active support by operating systems, browsers, and standard libraries are TLS versions 1.2 and 1.3. From a security perspective, and for reasons outlined later on in this course, TLS 1.3 is the clear recommendation of choice nowadays. However, if TLS 1.3 is not available on a system, or if the use of TLS 1.3 severely limits the interoperability with its context, then the minimum recommended version of choice is TLS 1.2.